rock and roll hoochie coo. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Pat here. I got a 1979 50 watt Marshall head. Customer brought it in saying the light on the switch is intermittent. Doesn't sound right. It sounds weakish, and it does not sound as good as his other 50 watt Marshall that has EL34s in it. This one has 6550s in it. All right, you just heard it. I just fired it up. Sounds pretty good. Doesn't quite sound exactly how I'd want a vintage Marshall to sound. Got some issues here. This jack is loose, dirty pots. So let's open it up. Let's see what's going on. Take a little dive into this Marshall. What a beaut. Let's do a visual. Power transformer, output transformer choke. Somebody put chicken heads on there. That's not the original knobs. We have new filter caps, new 6550 power tubes, new preamp tubes. And what do we have here? All right, so that's some work done to it. It's been fully recapped. We got a changed 100K resistor here, a couple change resistors. The coupling caps have been changed. The bias filter caps here have been changed. So, okay, so the work seems fairly okay. So this is a 2204 master volume lead 50 watt chassis. It has what's called cascading inputs. You plug into your high input, it goes through a gain stage, and then that goes into your low input jack, which then goes into another stage. It also has a master volume. You get a lot more gain that way. So these 2204s have a lot of gain compared to your early 70s, late 60s traditional Marshalls. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna start giving it a cleaning and servicing. That's gonna take care of half the problems right there. Clean these pots out a little bit with our deoxit. And then we want to check all the components and look for modifications. If you have a 60s, 70s Marshall, back in the 80s, it was probably modified. It was just a thing everybody did. It was more popular than hairspray on the Jersey Shore. Everybody was modifying Marshalls, so we want to see if anything was done. I see a cathode capacitor has been changed out. The value has been increased, so that's going to give this more bass, not less. So the client was saying it had less bass than his others. So we're going to want to look into components that have been changed back in 1986. When you have an amp that just doesn't sound full, you're going to want to check a couple things. Your power supply, your B+ voltage, the age and the condition of the power tubes. And here you want to check for crossover distortion and the bias. So if we look for crossover distortion, I don't see any. I mean, the amp sounds okay and the waveform looks okay, but I did just verify the bias and it is cold. We're running at about 40% plate dissipation, so we're really going to want to bump that up. And when we do, it's going to sound a lot better. We're probably going to end up changing the power tubes anyway, but cold bias is a major reason you're going to have an amp that just sounds a little bit flat. So just for demonstration, I'm going to adjust the bias pot. Now, right now, this is where it came in. And I'm going to crank it all the way up, and we're going to see it rise a little bit, right? Because we're biasing it hotter. We're going to pull more current. Big difference. Now I'm going to crank it all the way down just to see if we can get any crossover distortion. Yeah, a little bit. It's hard to see, but I see a little bit right here. So the way Marshall does their models and naming conventions can be rather confusing. So the 50 watt head master volume is a 2204. The combo version is a 2104, and then the 100 watt master volume version is a 2203. I'm also servicing this beautiful 2203. And some arc over, impedance mismatch, arc over between 3 and 4. It's important in all Marshalls to have your impedance correct. There's so much mythology and fetishizing of old Marshalls and the 2204 in particular. But the early 2204s don't have cascading inputs, so those have a much less aggressive sound. So you're thinking of like AC/DC and like that kind of classic late 70s, 80s rock tone. It's going to be the cascading input 2204s or the 100 watts. Usually the early ones before the rocker switches just have the metal toggle switches. So some of those 2204s are the non-cascading inputs. Here's the schematic of the non-cascading early version of the 2204. You don't have an extra stage, right? You have your low, which has some bigger capacitors in there to give you more bass response, or you can plug into your high, which has smaller, but they're mixed together on these 100Ks and they go right into this volume pot. And you can see on the board here, you can even see the markings, and it's deleted because this is not the model, but the board's the same. You see 330, 680. Big part of the sound of this amp is going to be this 10K resistor here. 10K is a very large value for a cathode resistor, but Marshall put this in intentionally on the second stage so that we can get asymmetrical clipping. Electronics is cool. This one value alone gives this amp unique character and really help define, the sound of your mid-late 70s, 80s metal and rock. It's kind of cool. So getting underneath the board is a little bit of a pain. I'm gonna remove the pots here and then also the jacks. So we're gonna get these out here, start lifting it up slowly. Wow, look at the ground here in this capacitor. This is terrible. Wow. If you're working on an amp and you're not pulling the board, one useful tool to have is a dental mirror. You can always look underneath and see what's going on. I'm glad we spotted that ground because that would definitely act up and cause humming and crackling. So it's really important that we found that. So to modify this Marshall to accept EL34s, we're going to have to get the bias in range. So there's a 56K resistor here that I'm going to remove and put in a 27K. The resistor here that we're changing is in series with the bias pot. This is the resistor off, and you'll see another resistor piggyback to it on top. You're also going to want to check these two resistors here that they're 220K. Sometimes they're going to be 150K, and that's fine for 6550s, but it is best practice to have 220K in there for EL34s. These amps were meant to be played and toured, and loose components and mechanicals can cause all kinds of issues. Just from moving this board, I see 2 wires that have popped up. We're going to want to go through and check every single wire. 1, 2, is there a third? Got everything back together, new power switch. EL34 JJs are now in, and we are going to bias the amp. Man, biasing is controversial. That's why I don't talk about it much. Everyone's got an opinion, and I gotta just say, and I think maybe I mentioned this in another video, as the years have gone on, opinions have changed. When I was starting out as an amp tech in the 30s, everyone was just doing, the old timers taught me, you just bring it up so you don't see a crossover notch, which is generally gonna make the amp, very cold. And then the Gerald Weber book back in the 90s maybe had, voltage charts. So everyone was doing voltage charts. So when I was a young amp tech in Brooklyn, everyone would be like, bias my amp to negative 42 volts, according to the Gerald Weber book. How we're going to do it today is we're going to bias it by plate dissipation. So there are some online calculators that you can go to, Rob Robinette's, Amplified Parts. Different calculators, and we're going to pull one of those up and we're going to bias this amp right now. So I'm going to use my Fluke in a method called the transformer shunt method. Now I don't recommend at home that you do this. If you're new and you're biasing amps and you're trying to learn, get the bias probes. It is safer than the method I'm going to use here, but the principles of plate dissipation and calculating that are the same. Let's get just a baseline B+ voltage. What ballpark are we in? We in Fenway? We in Yankee Stadium? Where are we? Okay, we have 385 volts DC at the high tension fuse here. That's normal. The B+ voltage on these amps is actually less than you'd imagine, less than the big Fenders too. And that's part of the sound. I pulled up the Amplified Parts bias calculator, put in our plate voltage, and I put in the power tube. EL34, which is a 25 watt plate dissipation. That's not output wattage. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to get it around 70% at 45 milliamps per tube. and then we're going to redo it because it's going to shift a little bit, and I'll show you. The amp is on. You want to make sure you have no sine wave. We're on a dummy load, it's silenced. And at home you have a nice safe bias probe. I'm going to cowboy it up, just ignore this. Center tap to plate. 50 milliamps on that tube. I've turned the amp off. I'm going to lower the bias a little bit, and we're going to recheck it. 35, that's too low, so now we're going to bring it up. You always want to recheck your B plus now because we're moving the bias pot around. So we have 387, so it's risen a little bit, right? It was running too hot, pulling too much current. We bring it down a little bit. Therefore, the B plus is going to rise. People get confused about that. If you pull these two power tubes right now and you're not pulling any current through the output section, that B plus voltage is going to rise. It could also be a problem for the filter cap. So B plus voltage is always moving around. If you're playing the amp, if there's a sine wave or you're adjusting bias. Now, one final check, because it's not from the high tension fuse to be absolutely accurate. We want to check the plate, pin 3, the plate of the tube. We have 385, 384, 45 milliamps on this tube, which is exactly 70%. We're going to leave it there. If there was a hard, fast rule for biasing, I will tell you there's not. When I'm biasing an amp, there's a lot of things going on in my head. The type of amp, the type of tube, the brand of tube, but I'm basically looking for plate dissipation. Now, this is not a cathode biased amp. This is a push-pull fixed bias amp where we're changing the negative of voltage applied to the grid of the tube to adjust the bias. I usually shoot for about 70%. 65 to 70 is a good range. Sometimes I'll go as high as 75, but I rarely go below like 55. And if you were to do the old school method where you just bring it up to get rid of the notch, you're probably like about 40, 45%. So that's like the old school method, TV shop days. And the whole finding the voltage, negative voltage from a chart is just, don't do that. So some of the things to remember about the 2204 is that it's a master volume amp, which in the 1970s was needed. Because before the 2204, you had the 1987 and the other Marshall product line. In order to really get those to really just distort aggressively, you had to crank them up really loud. That's where the master volume comes in. And certainly the cascading preamps has a lot to do with that. So the earlier Marshalls, they're plenty dirty. But in order to get that front end gain, a lot of people were taking, fuzz boxes or like Tony Iommi with a treble booster. People were taking the Electro Harmonix LP1. I think maybe Kiss did that, or AC/DC, I can't remember. One tech tip with old Marshalls, especially running 34s or any old amp, is screen current. When you start pulling a lot of current through a tube, the screen current, especially on EL34s, can really rise up. That's why in a lot of old Marshalls, you'll see changed screen grid resistors, or they're even the solder will be like it's been kind of heated up a lot. You'll have cold solder joints. That's because 34s will really run those screen grids hot. It's just the nature of the beast of an EL34, which is also the nature of the sound of an EL34. And we talked briefly about biasing, and God, there's so much more to talk about. That could be a series of videos. But this Marshall here is what's called a Class AB push-pull amp. And when we're talking about the biasing on that and plate dissipation in wattage is different than audio output. So like a EL34 has the 25 watt plate dissipation, and that's different from audio output watts. So plate dissipation, in a way, I like to think of it a little bit like car idle, like bias like a car idle. So you're setting kind of your idle. So we're setting an amp for 70% plate dissipation. That's like setting the engine at like, a high idle, but in that correct range where it's not stalling out at a light and it's not revving up when you're sitting there, in the parking lot. So anyway, there's so much more to talk about these topics, but thank you guys. You guys have been great watching a lot of videos, and hey, hit like and subscribe, and there is a lot happening next year. Whew. All right, so no more me talking. I talk too much. Time to get home. Peace.